First thing I'm going to do inside of Illustrator is start with a new file. Now, one of the things about the icons is they're square. Everything is square. You can choose different sizes and different units. Over here, I'm going to start with the units over here, and I'm going to change them to pixels. Usually I try to measure in pixels when I'm working. So when we get to changing the different sizes, though, we're also going to be talking about magnification. Okay, when you measure something for the retina display or a higher resolution, they're not necessarily talking about pixels, they're talking about scale. And this is 2 times bigger or 4 times bigger. Okay, so starting size is not really important as much as it is according to the dimensions, making sure it's 1 to 1. A common size for boxes that are on the computer, of course, are 16 by 16 pixels. That is the cursor that you look at, right? Another icon that's 16 by 16 pixels would be the favicon in the browser, right? When you're looking at a browser, you type in the browser and you have that little color image that shows up next to the name of your domain name. That's called a favicon. That's also 16 by 16 pixels. Another common size is 32 by 32 pixels, 64 by 64 pixels, 128 by 128 pixels, 256 by 256, and 512 by 512. Those are kind of common sizes. I tend to start with something like 512 by 512, and then once I'm done, then I can shrink it down to the other sizes. Now, when we get to scaling our icon, remember, if you just use the scaling features in the, using the direct selection, right? You know how we can use the black arrow and select our objects and then scale them? One of the problems with doing that is the stroke will stay the same. It doesn't scale, so if you're using one point stroke and you use the black arrow to scale it down, the 1 point stroke stays 1 point even as you're scaling it down, and everything gets messed up. So there's other ways of scaling. If you use the scaling tool inside of Illustrator, this one, scaling tool. If you use the scaling tool when you're scaling in Illustrator, it'll scale the stroke down in the same proportion as the other objects. So just be careful of that. That's a common mistake that happens when you're doing the scaling of things, is that operation. So again, I'm using RGB. I'm designing for the screen, for the color, RGB. Okay, and I'm going to type in 512 by 512. That's just a common size. Okay, so perfectly square, RGB. And I'm going to hit OK. So I have a square to start with. I'm going to make my square icon. Now, I remember telling you about and if you look at your iPhone, you'll notice that the icons have round edges, right? They have round, curvy edges. You don't need to do that. When you give it to Apple, you give them a square. It's the phone in the operating system that does the rounding of the edges for you. So don't think you have to do the round edges on your icon. The operating system does that. So you provide Apple a square one. Another round looking here. The main features I like to think about when I am doing an icon is, of course, keeping it simple. Okay, and again, we're going to go over the Pathfinder tools a little bit more in depth, as well as the appearance window a little bit more in depth. Those are the two I'm going to talk a little bit more about. We've already talked about them, but we're going to go over them a little bit more in depth. Again, the Pathfinder tool is how we make new objects from existing objects. I think we did the wheel in this class. Did we do the wheel in this class, or we did the wheel in my other class? I think we did the wheel early on in the class, right? We never did the wheel? The gear. Did we do the gear? We didn't do the gear in this class? Okay, we can do the gear. I like the gear. Let's do the gear. Okay. So, but we'll mix up the gear a little bit by adding effects to it. One of the things to think about when you're making an icon is, even though I'm doing it 512 by 512, and you're looking at it, it's going to scale down to tiny. It's going to be like 64 by 64 pixels. Okay? Even 32 by 32 even. So when it scales down, it's going to be small, so any fine detail that you have might get lost. So think of big shapes, and zoom factors sometimes help when you zoom in and zoom out. Zoom out all the way to a small on the screen and see, hey, did that line I just draw going to show up? Right? So think about that. So let's do the gear. The gear. So the gear is a fun one. How the gear is done. I'm going to do it kind of quick because I think you guys all know how to do things. I'm going to talk about the alignment too. I'm sorry. One other window, we're going to talk a lot about alignment, and we haven't really talked about alignment a lot. And so we're going to do alignment too. So we're going to do appearance, pathfinder, and alignment are some of the pop-up menus I'm going to talk about. So the first one I'm going to do is a circle. So I'm going to draw a gear. Okay. This is a dry erase marker. This is washable. Okay, here we go. We're going to have a gear that is... I draw it like this. Then the pathfinder, we're going to combine it all together into one object. Then we're going to cut a hole in it. Then we're going to have some lines go across like this. Maybe closer together here so you can see them. And then the lines will be behind there, so you see the lines in the triangle here. Like that. And so we'll be using alignment for some of this. We'll be using Pathfinder to cut it out, and we'll be using evenly distribute for this, and so we learn about that. Okay, so we're going to make something that looks like that. Again, I'm just using a white object with black stroke for now, and we'll have a gradient in the background also. So again, if I want to start this object out, I'm going to bring up my rulers. Remember rulers? We talked about rulers a little bit already. So if I go under view, I can say rulers, show rulers. It brings up rulers. And it's still not showing me my options that I want. Where's my guides, hide guides, smart guides, show grid, snap to grid, snap to point. What I want is when I'm drawing that, it shows me where the center point is, right? It's not showing me where the center is. That's okay. We're going to cheat. So again, I'm going to draw a circle in the center by holding down the Option key, and I'm going to click and drag, and I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and I'm going to draw a circle. Don't worry about size right at this moment. Now you say to yourself, how do I know that's in the middle of the artboard? Well, this is where the alignment feature comes in. Okay. In the alignment window, you'll notice, and if you don't see alignment, it's under Window, Alignment. In the alignment feature, if you don't see this bottom spot right here, this one that says down here, there's an option down here. You need to show options. For some reason, they don't give you this option automatically. So over here, you can say in the upper corner, say Hide Options, Show Options. When you show the options for the alignment window, it says Align To. See how it says Align To in the lower right corner? If I hold my cursor down there, you can say Align to Artboard. What that'll do is it'll take whatever object you have selected and put it right in the center of the artboard. Okay? Again, right here, it's called Align to Artboard. It's an option under the alignment feature. If you say Align to Artboard, it will move. Well, I guess I drew it pretty good in this. So let's move it a little bit. How about that? Oh, it says Align to Artboard. No? It should put it in the center. Oh, maybe I'm doing this wrong. I want there, there. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Align to Artboard and then say center. This is the center aligned right here. Center align, horizontal align center. This is horizontal align, vertical align center. That's what I should have done. Sorry. Align to Artboard, center here, and it's in the center. Okay, that's what I should have done. Next thing I'm going to do my I'm going to do a rounded rectangle tool. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to, again, I'm going to start up here in the upper corner here. Upper corner right here. And I'm going to draw a round rectangle, kind of trying to make it even as best as possible. Then you say to yourself, well, why did I try and make it even? Well, I want it to have an even so it's perfectly aligned in the center also. So again, I'm going to go over to my alignment feature, and I'm going to say align horizontal, align vertical. So by doing that, I know this rectangle shape that I made is directly over top of the circle. They're both right on top of each other, right? They're perfectly on top of each other because I use the alignment feature. Align to the artboard. Align the circle to the center. Align this object to the center. Did you see how I did that? The alignment feature is very useful. Next, do you remember when we did the flower? Right? Remember the flower we did with the rotating petals that go around? I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to duplicate my object 45 degrees here, duplicate my object 90 degrees here, and duplicate my object, I don't know what this would be, 175, like that. So how do I do that? So this is perfectly in center, so it should do it perfectly. Hopefully it does. Here we go. So I'm going to use the rotate tool, which is this one right here. Rotate tool. I'm going to click in the center. Right in the center. I'm going to put my cursor up towards the top of my object. And if you remember from doing the petal of the flower, I hold down the Option key on the keyboard to duplicate. So as I start clicking and dragging with my left mouse, it's going to duplicate this object. But as I'm rotating, I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and that'll make it a perfect 45-degree angle. Perfect 45-degree angle. I'm going to do that again by clicking in the center again, putting my cursor towards the edge of my object. I'm going to hold down my Option key. I'm going to click and start dragging. After I'm done dragging, I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and that'll be a perfect 90-degree angle. I'm going to let my finger up off the mouse. Again, I'm going to click in the center of my object. I'm going to put my cursor along the edge over here. I'm going to hold down the Option key on the keyboard. I'm going to click and start dragging, and then I'm going to hold down the Shift key to give me a perfect 45-degree angle, and I'm going to let my finger up off there. So again, I took the same rectangle that I had over top with the rounded edges, and I duplicated it around using the rotate tool just like I did when I was doing the petal in the flower. Do you remember doing the petal in the flower? That was the first week. Whoosh, that was a long time ago, wasn't it? Now I'm going to take all these objects that I have and I'm going to combine them together using the Pathfinder tool. Pathfinder tool. So I'm going to select all my objects. I want to make them all into one solid object, and of course the first Pathfinder one is the one that says Unite. Puts them all together into one. And I got a wheel kind of clog shape. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a triangle in the middle of my object. A triangle in the middle of my object. To make a triangle, I'm going to go down to my star tool. I'm going to double click on my star tool on the screen towards the center. Double click on the star tool on the screen in the center. And how many points does a star or a triangle have? 3, my lord. No, he was 2, my lord. 2, my lord. What movie was that from? Fiona. Shrek? No. Remember when the magic mirror came in? And he could choose from what? Snow White. He had his choice between Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, or Princess Fiona, right? Don't remember Shrek? 3, right? 3 points. There's my triangle. I want to rotate it all around, of course, because I want it to be up. There it is. I might scale it a little bit. And then, of course, I want it to be directly in the center, right? Directly in the center. How do I make it directly in the center? Again, I'm using my alignment tool, align to artboard, and say center, center. Now it's directly in the center. How do I know it's directly in the center? Well, because remember, this object's in the center also. So using the alignment feature, align to artboard, you go center, vertical, center, horizontal, and it puts it directly in the center. So now I'm going to use the triangle to cut a hole through. I want to cut a hole through. So I'm going to select all these objects, and I'm going to use the Pathfinder that says, the one that has, where is it? Minus front. I want minus front. There it is. Minus front is the second one over. So what minus front will do is take the triangle that's over top of my clog shape and it'll cut a hole through it. So it's going to minus where the top object is. Do you want me to put color in there so you can see it? Here, let's put color. Here's my front object. Let's put some color in there. Okay, there's an object. Look, there's an object over top of this one, right? There's two objects. I'm going to select it and I'm going to say minus front. It's the second one in the shapes mode. And what that does is then it'll cut a hole through. So the red went away, right? Why did it go away? Well, it cut a hole through to the one underneath. Okay, so I have a clog with a wheel in the center. And it kind of doesn't look right. Why doesn't it look right? Well, the top has more space than the bottom, visually, because of the way the triangle looks, right? So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to actually fake a little bit and move the triangle up, even though it's in the center, right? Hey, it is in the center. Visually, it's not correct. Why? It's because there's more space at the bottom here than there is at the top. So we have to kind of cheat a little bit, and I'm going to actually move the triangle up a little bit. It's okay. We're not here. What I'm looking for is even space here with even space here. Do you understand why being in the center probably is not the best way, right? Okay, you got to think visually. Balance is important. So you can cheat a little bit. Now I'm going to cut a hole through. Again, there, Pathfinder, cut a hole through. Okay, let's talk about rectangles. So I'm going to have color that goes through my object in here. I want to have colored triangles, rectangles go through here. So I'm going to use a rectangle tool. And I'm going to turn off my stroke. I don't want a stroke. I just want a color. I'm going to use a color shape. And I'm going to draw a rectangle. There we go. And then I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. And I'm going to move it up. So I have one color rectangle. So inside the triangle, I'm going to have colors that go down, that kind of stack inside there. And so I'm going to make one color rectangle, and then I'm going to duplicate that. Duplicate it. And I'm going to give it a different color. And then I'm going to duplicate it again. And I'm going to give it a different color. And then I'm going to duplicate it again. And I'm going to give it a different color. And then I'm going to duplicate it again. And I'm going to give it a different color. Here we go. So I have, whoosh. Then you look at it and you say, oh, there's some mistakes there, right? I have a gap between these ones and so on, and so this is not in the right spot. Let's move that up a little bit. Let's select them all. And look, this one's overlapping a little bit right here. Okay, let's move this one down a little bit. Now I have a gap here. So I'm having problems lining all these rectangles that I duplicated them so they're all same size, but when I was duplicating them, I might not have moved them in the right location. So what you can do with the alignment feature is you can do what's called distribute. I want to have all these rectangles evenly spaced between each other. And how I do that is by selecting them all, and that's what distribute is right here, distribute. I'm going to say distribute vertically. Oh, it's to artboard though. Do you remember that? Whoosh. Not to artboard. Remember align to down here, align to over here? We want to align to selection. Why do we want to align to selection? So that when it evenly distributes them, it distributes them between themselves and not the artboard. Remember when we were aligning to the artboard? So this is where I'm changing this setting right here. Align to selection right here. Now let me say evenly distribute this one right here. And it should evenly space now all the rectangles between themselves. And we'll do this again, this distribute, when we get to making we're going to be making a flyer. And we need lines for the flyer to, and we're going to do the same thing. So we have that. And then the last thing I want to do with my rainbow that I have here, my last thing I want to do with my rainbow is move it all the way to the back because it's behind my wheel here. The object, arrange, send to back. There we go. Okay, so I have a color option in there. Next thing I do, I want to have a gradient background. If you look at any of the apps that you have on your phone, right? If you look at some of them, they have some nice gradients. The Facebook has a nice gradient. You ever see the blue? That's a gradient. It's not a solid blue, right? It's a nice subtle gradient. I even think Waze has a little gradient. Keynote has a gradient. They all have. So you look at the iMovie has a gradient. iTunes Store has a gradient, right? If you look at the iTunes Store one, it has kind of a feel to it. So I'm going to give myself a little gradient in the background. Remember, you give it to a square. You don't give them. You don't give it to them. So don't worry about the round edges. I'm just going to use a rectangle, and I'm going to put it in the background. A rectangle. Put it all the way. I'm going to make sure it's the same size as my artboard. The gradient I'm going to use is going to be a radial gradient. If you remember, the gradient tool is this one right here. So I'm going to bring up the gradient tool. If you don't see the gradient tool, you can always go under Window, Gradient, and it'll bring up the gradient tool. And then in the gradient tool, we can make a gradient. Oops, that's a black to white. But we can always give it a color. We've gone over how to make gradients with colors before. There we go. Nice gradient there. And then instead of linear, I'm going to change it to radial, like that, radial. And then I'm going to take it and I'm going to make it larger. There we go. Nice gradient going from the center out. So you can make a gradient that goes center out. You're just going to have to practice with the gradient tool. There's a lot of features in there. Just a little bit. There we go. A little bit more like that. So I make a nice gradient. How did I adjust this gradient? Again, in the gradient window, I gave it some colors. Then I chose radial. Radial is the gradient. Then I'm going to take that object I just made and I'm going to send it all the way to the back. There we go. So I have my kind of icon going there. I think there's a gap in between these. Is there a gap? Very subtle gap. No gap. some reason it looks like there was a gap there. Okay, and then the last thing I'm going to do is maybe I'm going to make these objects bigger. I'm going to make them bigger. I'm going to select all my pieces except for the background, and I'm going to scale it up. Uh-oh, remember if I scale it this way, it's not going to scale the stroke, right? That's okay. Scale. Scale. There we go. Okay, so what could this clog icon be? What could it represent? I know I just made a shape. It wasn't really a fun, you know, this doesn't, I didn't really think about what my, you should think about what your icon should be. But remember, I use the tools. I use Pathfinder to combine the objects together. I cut a hole through it using Pathfinder. I put some rectangles back here to give me some color. I evenly distributed the rectangles using the alignment feature. I made a rectangle and I used a gradient there. Is that the coolest icon you've ever saw or what? Okay, I don't know. Let me save my file. So I'm going to save this, and then when we come back to doing this again, like I just said, when we come back to doing this again, we will I will teach you how to shrink this down into multiple artboards, each one for a different device. Okay, each one for a different device. You too should go and read. I left you a whole bunch of. Hold on, let me save this. I left you a bunch of reading about how to design for the Android as well as the iPhone. Remember that? That's inside of